programs to jump on brain training. So, you know, I'm not familiar with Soho House. What's their? Sure. Okay. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, we have that in the. I bet it is. I can't imagine. That must be amazing. Um, yeah. So we have the full sized offices, and we have and we're doing that in LA and St. Louis, but and in New York City, we're looking for a larger facility because we have so much throughput there that we're outgrowing our micro office. But generally, our model is a virtual team of coaches who jump on 7 days a week in real time and help people put wires on their head and help them troubleshoot and bug them to fill out their sleep surveys and check in with them about goals and say, hey, it's time for more data, and it's a coaching process. And I do a lot of knowledge-based work and have a whole team of coaches that work sort of for me that do all of the education, hand-holding, troubleshooting, cajoling with the tech. So, and of course, we did some tech with you a while ago. Yeah. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've made it a lot more streamlined. We've really made the whole process one that can be facilitated virtually. We send you gear and get stuff on your head, and that can be used, of course, for lots of reasons. For you, we did a fun, what I call a contrast map or a dirty map, where we and I have the luxury of old data from you from 4 years ago or something. So there are changes, but what are nice changes from before and changes from now. Your brain's gotten better, sharper, shrugged off fog. Some nice changes. But we also have maps back to back now from a few days apart from 2 weeks ago or something. And brain mapping is relatively stable. Brain mapping, or QEEG, this process of looking at the resting electricity over time, is kind of like a fingerprint. Doesn't mean a whole lot by itself, but you can sort of look at unique features for each person. Unlike a fingerprint, there are similarities across people. We call them phenotypes, kind of like height or hair color or muscle mass tendencies or whatever, your fast twitch, slow twitch ratios you tend to get, that kind of stuff. And yes, it can be meaningful, but not always deterministic. So brain mapping is this art a little bit of teaching people to look at stuff that's usually mysterious and look at the big cortical structures and say, okay, here's some plausible ideas about you. Also measure some performance to get some actual data points to make sure you aren't, off there making guesses that aren't somewhat valid. And with that perspective, you can kind of sketch out gross features of stress, sleep, attention, speed of processing, attention, gross things like that, high level stuff that is resources and traits, not states, not how you're feeling necessarily, but resources. And then, of course, we did a contrast or a dirty map, and you had, I don't know, caffeine, a bunch of other stuff in your system, and we mapped your brain again. And with a quick pre-post like that, you can actually do within subject, within person kind of comparisons, and instantly gonna go, oh, what does it do? What does caffeine or et cetera do to my attention, my stress, my sleep, my speed of processing? So we have some fun data for that. I forget though, John, who worked with you to get your data, I didn't follow up with him. I don't know which is which. So I have It's okay. I have two, and they look really different. And I'm like, oh, this one's really different. I wonder if this one here is him being helped by something that he took afterwards, or hurt by something. I don't know which. I don't know the order. So I went into it kind of blind, and I didn't bother to follow up because I don't want to know everything. All the I want to look at data. So I have two very contrasting data sets for you. Can you explain a little more about what we did, like what the experiment was? 2018. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, we can certainly look at that older data set later. I will say one little perspective on that is I think the healthy habits you've been engaging in for the past couple of years have kind of fixed difficulties your brain to some extent had. And the lifestyle you had before, while it wasn't probably hurting you, may not have been helping concussions or some crappy sleep habits that built up in college and threw you off for a while, et cetera, or stressors you had never dealt with. So we were seeing way back then an awful lot of difficulty and brain fog and some other stuff. In spite of there not being no dramatic difficulties performance wise for you, we were seeing all these little inefficiencies in your data everywhere, and that's what we were training, of course, for a few months and worked on. And we got some changes, back then, but really nice changes now. I mean, looking at the old ones versus the new ones, the meditation, I assume management of sleep, of course, exercise and structured functional performance and all those things, that has had an impact. Your brain looks more focused, more clear, way less stressed, younger, quicker now than it did 4 years ago, significantly. I would say on a population bell curve, a couple of standard deviations is almost everywhere in terms of shrugging off brain fog and burnout and that kind of stuff from a few years ago. So it's really nice to see. Uh, uh, it's development. Well, I don't know. I mean, 18 to 22 developmentally is a big change. 32 to 37 developmentally is not a big change. 37 to 50 is like there's a you're about to hit a period. You're at the end of a youthful period. I'm of course a gerontologist, so I have to jump on the details now. But the 30s is sort of the end of our youth, basically. And this, you of course help people all the time work against this thing called sarcopenia, this drop off of muscle mass, bone mass, water mass, but a gain in fat mass as you get older. And resistance training and managing nutrition, all those things will help work against that arc, that natural degradation. So that's one of those things that's normal aging but don't tolerate it kind of stuff. So is speed of processing things that I tend to see in brains. Uh, anyways, you're about to get older, but if you need to work on your brain and stay sharper, we have tools for that, Colonel Austin. We can build you, so great. All right. Great. Well, I'm glad you experienced that. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. 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 Sure. Ooh. Okay. Great. Okay. Okay. Uh, right. Right. Yeah. Would you like me to tell you my impressions or walk through data with you? Well, I have the dates. I have the dates on it. So I just didn't know if the first or second was the clear. John was in the process of rescheduling one of our plans for this, and I said, "Oh, since we're going to reschedule, does he have the kit still? See if he wants to do a dirty map or a contrast map." John's like, "All right." So that's why you got that email. John was like, "It was just to fill time, but also why you had the kit. Hey, why don't we do it again?" Um, so I know which one is which, and the second one, I will say it overshot in terms of activation level. There are things that are impaired by your routine. Essentially, it speeds you up significantly. Reaction times are way up, but some aspects of focus are actually tanked, including, we can look at it. Let me. Do I have a share screen here? I do. Let me see. Entire screen. Uh, Share. How do I do this? I like that. Sorry. Of course, now I'm in a nice. So I'm gonna bring this down. I think this will work if I just make this. Can you still can you see this? Can you see these bar graphs? All right, great. So we're looking at bar graphs. Mm, yes. Yeah, and I'll give you the PDFs so you can yeah, absolutely. I'll give you the PDF so you can snip out, yeah, stuff that's specific or really interesting. You can clip out the actual feature set. We're looking at attention testing essentially, and we do two things when doing brain mapping. We do an attention test, which basically bores you to tears for 20 minutes, and then we do a map of your brain at rest. And the attention test will flash a really big number on the screen, a one or a two, or it speaks a one or a two over the speakers about once per second for over 20 minutes. So it's going one, one, two, and it gets tedious. The ask here is to click on the one and don't click on the two. It's a little frustrating. Yeah, it's what I call a desirable difficulty. You figure out, to some extent, the reason this is so hard, the reason it feels so onerous and tedious, is because the time scale that we're asking you to respond in is it makes you have to respond just after automatic attention has gone offline. There's a period of time, if you're noticing and scanning that natural human alerting and orienting thing, after about 300 milliseconds, and after you look at a point in space, there's a inhibition. You can't look back at that thing or automatically react to things for about 800 milliseconds. So we're dropping the need to respond into a window at which you've just gone offline. And we're looking at two things: your ability to click activate on the one and to pump the brakes on the two. And we kind of contrast the order and the auditory versus visual. And On the screen, we have your attention. The left side of the test is clicking successfully. On the right side of the test, called response control, is pumping the brakes. So the 1 versus the 2, left versus right side of these pages. And the big differences, there's a bunch of small differences. The big differences are under auditory function. There's a blue and a purple bar labeled vigilance and focus. So vigilance is changing gears. When the computer's going 1, 2, 2, 1, and then repeats a series of one stimulus, the first one of those is an alerting. Ooh, there's a 1. And so the first one on the screen in a run, or the first one spoken over the speakers in a series of those, is the alerting event, the vigilance event, the check to make sure you're actually noticing stuff changing. And the purple bar, called focus, is the opposite. It's the background, boring, repeating stuff. So the auditory focus is the computer going 1, 1, 1 for several trials. Visuals, the same thing on the screen. And what you can see is your vigilance, the shifting gears, the moment of the 1 going into your ears. Before the first day you did this test, clean, so to speak, no caffeine, which is the standard case, you're 105% of typical. Now, the scoring on this stuff is set up so 100 is average for any age-matched sample, and 15 points plus or minus is typical. So 85 to 115 is pretty typical. Below 85, stuff gets in the way. Above 115, you're compensating or you're highly performant, depending. And you can see there's some clusters of bars. When those little clusters are level, things are efficient. So you can see your speed bar, the red bar, sticking way up. For auditory systems, it's 133 the first time, 138 the second time. So what that is 2 to 2.5 standard deviations above average on a bell curve for auditory speed, for how quick you are. And your visual system is 108 and 118. So in both cases, you're faster than average, and your routine on Monday made you even faster. Your speed got even faster, as you can see. So that's interesting. But the vigilance, the moment of grabbing information when it changes gears in the auditory system, went from 105 down to 82. So you lost, what is that, 18, 20, you lost a standard deviation and a half in performance for the auditory alerting moment. What this means is, in that morning when you're charging and you're fully, primed with all your routines, you're not going to be a very good listener to your wife. In that moment, she's going to say, "Hey, honey," and you're going to just like keep plowing through what you do and go, "Sorry, what?" Like later on. It's a moment of grabbing information auditorily. So it's fine for heads down work but not as good for being flexibly having to screen, filter, and shift. You wouldn't do well in a debate with this auditory because you'd be stuck in your head or missing things as they were said. But look at the vigilance, the alertness in the visual system. So that did the opposite, went from 93 all the way up to 106. So you gained almost a standard deviation in visual alertness and crispness, but you're losing it in the auditory. And what's happening here, it's not that your routine is doing only, auditory versus visual benefits. What's happening is this underlying bottlenecks for you, old weaknesses, if you will. And as you stress the system out, the stress where you're adding onto it is showing us some things that essentially are less performant. The ones that are falling over, especially the auditory one. You can also see sustained scores. Look at the trend across time for 30 or 20 minutes. Sustained auditory was a 116 that first time, but after your routine, it dropped to a 96. So again, still typical, not in your way, but it was highly performant, and you lost 20 points. So that's, a dip. And beyond that, for the reaction, for the performance, it's pretty stable. Your impulsivity, you're a little impulsive, a little reactive overall. And before your routine, 86. After your routine, 83, roughly the same score. So it doesn't help you with self-control, that routine. The caffeine, theanine often does for people, but it's not actually giving you that inhibitory tone. My hunch is meditation without it would have improved this, but meditation with caffeine for you or whatever seems to not improve it. Let's look at the actual reaction times as raw numbers. And this is interesting a little bit. You see that the bottom numbers here on the screen, your auditory reaction time went from about 200 milliseconds, 201, down to 168, which is meaningfully different. You shaved off a significant amount of time. And your visual went from 240 down to 169, which is a pretty big improvement. So your reaction times got very fast. And to put these in context, these 170s, if you will, that you have on that Monday morning versus the low 200s, it takes the human brain information registers or is transduced in tissue like the retina, which turns light information into brain information, or the cochlea. Same thing for sound pressure stuff that has been transduced into mechanical and liquid waves, and then it turns into brain information in the cochlea. Well, those transducers, from the time information hits the transducer, the retina, let's say, to go back into the place where you can actually perceive it for the first time in the visual cortex, the auditory cortex, it goes into the thalamus, then out into the cortex, and that's where you first notice it. It goes through a couple of neurons. That takes 70 milliseconds if you're super young and healthy and the best human in the world, basically. So 70, 80, 90 is roughly just registering the information. Your reaction times at 170 milliseconds, let's say, with the stuff in your system, half of that time, more, is just the information registering in the actual transmission time of your machinery, of your brain. The rest of it is Coach Joe going, yeah, and like deciding and acting like really, really fast, 70, 80 milliseconds together, decision time and action time. That's ridiculous. That's just absurdly fast. We rarely see speeds this fast. And even the 200s, I work with Olympic athletes, boxers, fencers, people that whose speed and reaction time is a thing they rely on. And they're usually in this range that you were on the clean day, in the low 200s. That's usually pretty much good. There is such a thing as being too fast if you're not accurate. In the low 200s, people are often great. Some people can get faster, and you're showing that on that Monday somehow. Well, we know how, but you managed to crank up your visual reaction time by 71 milliseconds. It's ridiculous. And your auditory went up by 33 or something. So really fast to begin with, and you got faster. But look at the errors, these things called persistence right here. So you made some persistence errors, meaning you got repetitive. That auditory inattention, some of the other small errors you made, when you made them, they got like automatic or reactive or repetitive. You weren't controlling the error moments quite as well. So what's happened? Yeah, please. Yeah. 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 Ah. Well, I mean, I'm sort of taking a different tack on this. I think what you've done is overshot in your biohacks a little bit with the activation curve. I think if you pulled back on dose of caffeine by half, or if it's something else that's causing some oxidative stress, or maybe your workout in the morning was too cortisol heavy, maybe you switch to a less cortisol activating whole body exercise, like, in the morning instead. There's something going on with the activation, your performance, that Yerkes-Dodgson curve, that inverted U, an arousal level, a little bit of activation is a good thing, a little more, even better, a little more, yeah. But then you start getting more and more activated, and performance really starts to degrade for complex tasks and high performance. So I have a hunch that we're just seeing you a little bit overactivated. And so we're getting amazing reaction times, but that 170 probably isn't where you should be reacting for the best possible performance. Might be more like 200 for you. I don't know. But that being said, seeing that please. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's the repetitive errors we saw. You kind of checked out here and there. I pulled up your brain maps. Mm. That can happen with activation, yeah. And you also have a slightly unusual auditory system to begin with, which is what's happening. Even without the stuff in your system, we see that your auditory system on the right-hand side has a blob of delta waves. And This is something you used to show 4 years ago. It was much more significant. Your brain was like solid delta 4 years ago. You'd either had a concussion or something, that some wear and tear. I mean, you're a pretty active guy. It's very plausible you got your bell rung a handful of times. Um, and that was showing up 4 years ago pretty dramatically. Right now, you see it next to the right ear. You see a blob of delta waves, and it's kind of an orangey blob. And we're looking at scales of the amounts of brain waves compared to the average person your age, essentially. And there's a bell curve. It's a little color bar. And when things are orange, you're about 2 standard deviations, 2.5 above average. So a lot of delta waves were stuck right there. And you also made lots of theta brain waves broadly. Theta is like delta's life and the heartbeat of the brain and background metabolism. You don't think in it, you kind of live in it. And theta is lubrication. So if you make a lot of theta, it's like ADHD stuff, squirrel, and you can't pump the brakes. But you can also make theta on like anxiety circuits, and they can, flare up anxiety for some people. So on that Friday, you had a little blob of delta, which is a persistent feature you've had for years, and it looks better. So your brain's probably actually more awake and crisp and clear than I've seen you in a long time, which is awesome to see. But you also make a lot of theta. As you close your eyes, your brain's allowed to get more distractible than the average person, which is sort of why you have some difficulty pumping the brakes in that too in general. Not a huge difficulty. It doesn't quite rise to the ADHD level, but we're picking up that tendency to be a bit reactive or impulsive. And we see it here on your brain maps as high theta, and that's 2 to 3 standard deviations or more above average. Now, with the stimulants in your system, what's happening is the theta is being shut down. So you can be a little more driven, self-controlled, and narrow. You can have a little more inhibitory tone, so less reactive in some ways. But the delta in the auditory system, I don't know if you can see that, but the blob went from orange and kind of diffuse to dark red and focused. So something in that mix of things you're doing, either you fatigue that system or you activate it too much, it's knocking over that old sort of inflammatory, maybe concussive thing that was a little mild auditory processing thing for you. It gets pushed. It's like having the old knee injury, fail 40 miles into the century ride, or something. It's like, oh man, because you're stressing it, not because it has a problem necessarily. So I see that, and I also see the theta is why your attention and speed and stuff in visual system, back of the head, the theta broke up completely in the second map. There's no extra theta. This is eyes closed, and I'm going to look at eyes open now. Let me page through some data for a second. So here we go to eyes open data. So now we're looking again at a link called linked ears page. So the 10,000 foot view of the scalp patterns. We can zoom in better. But here you see the change again, Friday to Monday, where you had delta and theta on the left-hand side of the page. And in this case, when the eyes are open, the delta gets enhanced, which it should not do. It should go down when the eyes are open. And the stimulant on Monday cranks up the delta. And it also cranks up your theta, which is why you're a little more error prone. Your alpha next to the ear, which is alpha is a neutral, inattentive, idle frequency, like between gears in your car. That alpha has gone up in the auditory system on Monday. Broadly, everything's kind of gone up in that auditory. So there's a little mild, concussion or something that is stressed by some of the things you did. And if I had to guess, it's probably a combination of caffeine and the hardcore workout. The hyperbaric should have actually improved a lot of this, and it didn't improve the slow brain waves. Had you just done hyperbaric, we would have seen reduced slow brain waves afterwards, which is interesting. But we can also look at the amounts of your brain waves, the speeds of your brain waves. And I'm zooming in on your left hemisphere and looking at the speeds of your alpha brain waves to start. And alpha is our speed of processing. Now, in our 30s and 40s, the alpha speed starts to dip a little bit, and our speed of processing starts to slow down. And lots of other things cause alpha speed to slow down, like tiredness or injuries or illness or concussions or mold or Lyme or chemo or anything neuroinflammatory, anything stressful to the brain can make the delta waves climb because we're trying to repair the brain, and make the alpha waves slow down because the system's struggling a little bit. And on that Friday, your alpha waves were running about 3 standard deviations below average, really out in the corner of the bell curve. And that probably means you're experiencing in general, when you aren't like really dialed in, you're experiencing word finding issues and delayed recall and tip of the tongue stuff. And that's it's an aging thing mixed with some probably old concussions for you that's making you look much slower than you already should. So this, as your brain coach, this will become a big performance target for me. I'm like, wait a minute, why is Joe's alpha running so slow? He's probably having reduced access for words and names and quick internal access for stuff. And when he gets tired, he can't absorb. Like, it's probably hard to read for you, do boring things with information when you're tired. Like after dinner, tough to like sit down and read through a bunch of, low key taxes or something. Is it? Yeah. Okay. So we see all that delta. Yeah. And given that there's a plate in your head, we might not be seeing excess brain waves the way it looked on those maps, because the plate can change how brain waves can move through the skull and be seen. So my hunch is there are extra brain waves there. Surgeries, injuries, and things cause blobs of delta. It's probably a real feature. But we shouldn't go, oh my goodness, it's really unusual necessarily, because especially if it's a plastic plate or something, one of those porous ones or the Plec plates or things, they let electricity right through. So, we have to take that into account when interpreting what it might mean for one person. But since I have your attention test, I know there's an auditory thing going on specifically that doesn't show up visually. We see an auditory area in the brain maps. We're hypothesis generating. We're modeling what could be true for you. We're not diagnosing you. We're saying, hey, do we find a performance thing? And it turns out we did. Now, I happen to know you a little bit, so I kind of know that's there, but we can do this cold each time. One interesting thing about your reaction times, your alpha speed, which also affects reaction times, by the way, is look at your alpha speed on that Friday versus that Monday. The alpha on Friday was -3 or slower standard deviations on a bell curve, and you gained at least a standard deviation, maybe 1.5 on that Monday. But it also shut down your delta, made your brain go, okay, I'm awake. Like, the delta slowed down too. You went to -4.5 standard deviations on that Monday. Just shut off your brain's rest mode, basically. So, so there's your data, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, interesting. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's amazing. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. A couple things that jump out to me on that might be interesting, especially for folks that are thinking right now, hey, wait a minute, I thought Andrew said that he has auditory issues. Why is he saying he's got supernatural abilities? The receptive language thing's often on the left side of the brain, and you've got damage in the right. So you're not going to miss receiving language. It's going to be fine. And depending on when that happened and your accommodation, how you trained it, you might be dealing with a mix of natural gifts and accommodations that develop this eidetic, auditory memory almost. And yet, when Amelia calls your name, you're going to be like, oh, sorry, what? So, by the way, it's not your fault. You can tell her that you have a trouble listening and you really want to listen to her. Um, you know, yeah, you're welcome. Two, in the short term, you can accommodate. That's right. Honey, here's how you can, help me listen to you better. Call my name and give me a 1 second or 2 second beat and then continue the sentence, and I'll be much more checked in, which is true for you. The vigilance, the alerting, the moment of changing gears is hard, but the focus is fine or okay. You're checked in. You can listen once you're listening. So have her go, honey, 3, 2, 1. What do you think? Thai pizza? Instead of like, hey, honey, what do you want for dinner tonight? Thai or pizza? Because you'll come online in the break and try to roll the tape. And if there's too much information, it will not have gotten in. And, So have her alert you, give you a pause, and then continue, especially if she's not in the same room or behind you or whatever. So short-term accommodations. Long-term, we can train the extra delta out so that you can bring up that vigilance, essentially. We've never really targeted that delta. I look back at your old training logs. We've done a bunch of executive function things and sleep things. And those are things that your brain shows differences in, which is cool now compared to before. I won't bring up your old data just to spare you a little bit, but there's lots of red blob heads in that maps, and a lot of the attention performance 4 years ago is a lot worse. A lot worse. So your meditation practice, your circadian regulation habits, your resistance training for managing cortisol and growth hormone and keeping you, appropriately stressed, that is a big deal. Keep enough muscle mass on so you can do energy flux and energy exchange. I'm really getting big into this idea of energy flux as a circadian cue and a major thing that is sort of something that we can grab levers and pull, and you can recontextualize a lot of the bad habits that Westerners have around mucking about with energy flux, ectopic energy that's spilling over into circuits and systems and storage where it shouldn't be. So that's why I encourage people in the morning to do things like get up, and instead of moving from the bed to the couch or the desk or the breakfast table, you move from the bed to the yoga mat or the dog park, or you bring your wife coffee from the place that's a mile away. You do low intensity exercise, because in the morning your liver has essentially squeezed your cortisol squeezed your liver and fed you breakfast to wake you up. So you're waking up with cortisol and glucose in your system. And if you then do high intensity things, you will call for more cortisol and call for more glucose, but you've had high receptor sensitive occupation in cortisol. There's been lots of insulin around already. So you're at risk for making yourself cortisol resistant and insulin or glucose resistant by calling for hardcore workouts every single morning. So it can screw with the circadian information. And so what I often recommend is low intensity workout, fasted, when you first wake up after a relatively locked in wake time, rise time as a key circadian thing. But then I often recommend, if folks can, they move their intense workouts, which are super important, to between like 3 and 7 in the afternoon, when cortisol is its lowest and cardiac output is at its biggest. And the cortisol spike you create is felt, mobilizes fat, gets some circadian stuff, and then it burns out and you're left with low cortisol, not high again. So that's my some of my thought around what's going on for your activation state is the combination of all the interventions, something in there, maybe some caffeine, probably the intense workout, maybe the circadian time. Like this would look different in the afternoon than in the morning for you, because cortisol would not be underlying at a high level. So I don't have an answer in terms of like strategies for you, but it's useful to look at, I think. Yeah. Yeah, there's some time of day effects. They're not that dramatic. For most people, if you did a map at 7 or 8 a.m. and a map at noon, it'd be about the same. A map at 2 p.m. or 3 p.m. probably wouldn't be. I mean, I do a lot of work, a lot of decision making around this stuff on population, best practices. So I essentially try not to map in the afternoon unless you're a kid or somebody who's got a weird schedule and they don't use caffeine, because otherwise, there's just caffeine, as you know, distorts maps hugely. So um, but generally a map will be about the same. And EEG, brain performance, and the EEG start to show fatigue effects or time of day effects for most people. If you have a normal like 7 a.m. wake time, around 2 p.m. or 3 p.m. is when you're starting to see time of day effects. And that is because arousal is lower and body temperature is changing, and it's a circadian thing to some extent, and a fatigue thing, and my work sucks all day long thing. And, so. Yeah. Yeah. I have those two types of days. Um, one thing that has saved me a lot of stress is to block the types of days I have out so that I don't do two in a row. For me, there's just when I do a day of intro calls and Zoom reviews on people's data and education or podcasts, I might do one of those days from 7 a.m. until, 5 p.m. or something. And it's kind of a lot of work to talk, as you know, especially to remain, actually clear and communicative. So I like to do one of those days where I'm just like on the phone or on Zooms and just, very interactive. And then I like to have a day where I might spend some time in the morning, of course, while the coach is doing case reviews on Slack and things. But then I try not to do things that take me out of my mode of a different work or sustained output mode. So I might spend 2 or 3 days a week where I'm trying to do content or write or do systematic case reviews or something. And I tend to protect that time from the things that might take me out of the mode is a big piece of it. Again, spend a lot of emphasis on when I wake and sleep as a way to keep me sort of optimal, so I don't have to sleep too much, so I don't feel too low energy. That's a circadian hack. And I tend to do the morning routine to get me prepped the same way you do and get me dialed in for the day. And I might change it a little bit day to day. Like today's a fasting day for me, so I didn't have any food, but I normally wouldn't eat until about 11 or 1, depending on the days anyways. But, today is a fasting day. And that brings me to one of the hacks that I love is fasting and nutrient partitioning, basically. So I have this perspective on biohacking the body such that you can really pull levers in nutrition in 3 ways, or partition things in 3 ways: calories, macros, and time. Time, of course, is fasting, intermittent fasting or periodic fasting, depending. So I play with all of those things a lot and really examine what happens in my body and my circadian rhythm and my time, my performance, my sleep. And I really love using breath acetone as a measure of ketones, not blood, because you're getting a downstream measure that's really late in the process of the body shifting over to metabolic flexibility, not getting digestive processes or handling inbound fats and things. As folks, I'm sure in this show know, most of your listeners already know, there's like ketones we burn and glucose we can burn, but that pool of stuff we're burning, we think about, are you ketogenic or are you burning carbs? That's only about 15% of the energy being burned. Total 15-20% is a mix of ketones and glucose back and forth, and it's never one or the other. It's, if you're eating lots of sugar, it's mostly carbs you're burning, but a little bit of ketone. If you're eating mostly fat and protein, it's mostly ketone and a tiny bit of carb as you create the carb out of the glycerides and stuff. But 80 to 85% of the stuff we burn, the energy flux, is actually free fatty acids from the storage pools. So you're always burning fat, short answer. So I play around with trying to watch what's happening in that last 10 or 15 or 20% to figure out essentially how to coach people. Because I do a lot of coaching of the body to support the brain, this functional neuroscience stuff, even though the neurofeedback is my heavy lifter. All of our coaches are generally helping quarterback a whole bunch of strategies for folks to optimize how they dial in their hyperbaric, their red light, their ice, their heat, their whatever. Excuse me for 1 second. Yeah, I need to get rid of a tickle. So from the point of view of nutrients and playing with energy, I really work on that metabolic flexibility thing so that I can look at how my body generates acetone, but not sort of listen to the keto gurus. No offense. I have this perspective on, yes, there's all these rules, and yes, everyone can tell you what's healthy or not healthy or works. And a lot of that's going to be individual in terms of what actually works for you, how you handle sugar, how you handle cholesterol, how you handle building muscle. There's so much individuality there that I'd rather folks know the framework and how the systems work and know what people are trying, like the rules or the strategies people try for biohacks, but then look at data points to figure out for you what's actually happening. So I use breath acetone every morning and before each meal to figure out, am I able to handle the carbs I'm eating? Is my workout, is my fasting, is my time period a window? What is it doing to my ability to produce ketones? Because you can't produce significant breath ketones or acetone, which proxies. Acetone in the breath proxies to blood ketones about 10 to 1. So ACE or acetone about 10, let's say, is equivalent to about 1 millimolars of butyrate in your in your blood. Above 4 millimoles, you lose sensitivity. The curves diverge. You can't really estimate super well in breath above 4. So the breath meters go to about 40 if they're well calibrated. So 0 to 40 is 0 to 4, and 4 is pretty deep for ketosis. But I can go from 0, crushing carbs, eating pizzas and ice cream and things, 0, 0, 0 for a few days in a row. Today is the third day. I had yesterday and the day before, I had carnivore plus fruit is how I eat when I'm eating in a good, sort of, for me, what I consider healthy is carnivore plus fruit, essentially. So the past 2 days, that was what I ate. 2 days before that, a week before that, it was just, I was not eating, especially well, lots of carbs, lots of crap. So I got up on a few days ago and went, 0 ketones this morning. Okay, I guess I had too much ice cream yesterday and the day before, maybe the day before that, because you get a 2 to 3 day impact on your metabolism, all the enzymes, all the things ramping up. It doesn't happen instantly like you eat food and ketones change. The acetone takes a couple of days. All the habits of sleep and stress and exercise build up. So you get an indirect measure, and you can't make breath ketones with any high blood sugar or any high insulin. It suppresses the generation of high levels of ketones if you have high insulin or high blood sugar. So you can use one flag. I use one flag to figure out where on that axis, if I'm on the right side of that boundary. And so I went, a couple of days ago, 0 ketones, crap. Okay, I better clean it up for a few days. And 2 days ago, I had, steak and eggs, 80s bodybuilder style diet, and then yesterday did it again. Vince Garanda would be really proud of me. And today I woke up, yesterday was 0 again, or 1 or something, it's like 0.1, basically nothing. And this morning I woke up with a 10, and tomorrow, if I do it again, I'll be at a 30 or something. So, you can sort of get a sense of how your individual body reacts. And if I'm not crushing carbs every day, what I found is I can have a pint of ice cream at 5 p.m. And as long as I haven't done that week, the next morning I'm back in ketosis at 10 or 15 again, or 1 or 1.5 millimoles, after having 150 grams of refined sugars and carbs and processed food. And so I like to take a harm reduction approach with things that are enjoyable: television, drugs and alcohol, stimulants. It's harm reduction. We maybe don't want to abstain. I have no judgment around abstinence from substances. I think humans are wonderfully, replete with the ability to feel joy and pleasure, and that's a big part of being human. So, I'm a big fan of healthy vices like coffee, as well as maybe some unhealthy vices. But unhealthy vices being rewarding, you have to kind of have a relationship with it's healthy, like television or whatever else, the internet or Twitter, who knows for you, but for any individual. But the rewarding stuff tends to drive behavior. So it's important, I think, for us to both not be too rigid, too orthorexic, and go, carbs, I can't have carbs necessarily, unless you want to, but I don't want to fall into a coma walking by a donut shop and getting a cephalic insulin response and going, because I smelled something. I'm kidding a little bit. It doesn't happen, right? But that old 70s, 80s cartoon of the dog smelling the pie and being wafted away, you may have experienced. You walk by, you smell something amazing of a restaurant, and your stomach rumbles. That's an insulin response in your brain. It's a tiny one, but your brain's like, oh, hey, there might be some food around. And it creates behavior. It creates this. That's why diet sodas and things might not be good for everyone who's trying to cut carbs, because if you have a sweet flavor, you might create a cephalic insulin response, which is minor, but insulin dropping in the body is what causes craving for more carbs. So you don't want to create little mini roller coasters to irritate your self-control if you're having trouble with carbs, potentially. But so anyways, these are all things I manage for the brain as well as for the body, essentially, to keep myself highly performant. So it's a very long-winded answer, but I think it's important to hack sleep, energy flux, and as well as have a good morning routine for dialing in the mode you need to be in each day. Oh, so I think I have it within reach. I do. So I use a device called the BioSense. Um, yeah, and BioSense. I think Peak Brain 20 might be a coupon for this. But it's a lovely acetone device. Company, St. Louis company. Um, Readout Health is the name of the company, but BioSense or My BioSense, you can find it. But these are great company, and they've done a lot of work before they released it. Like they're in the same marketplace as all the other breath-based, biohacking things, and they've come into this market, the biohacker market recently. But they've been around for years doing really nice studies with diabetes and other things in hospitals and in surgery centers and things for really acute people, using it in clinical environments with incredible impact. So if you do have sugar regulation issues, I think acetone becomes a huge friend. I also think it's, you can have a kid hack their acetone without doing finger pricks, or if you don't feel like sticking your finger every 2 minutes. And you'd have to sample. There's something called the Nyquist theorem. If you're looking for signals, things that vary with periodicity, with impact, you have to sample them twice as often as they vary to figure out what's happening. The Nyquist theorem. Um, Therefore, you have to do blood measurements against eating food and exercise twice as often as it varies, which means you have to be sampling blood every hour to understand the trend, roughly. But acetone, because it's downstream and you're getting the effect of enzymes generating, ramping up to produce more generation of ketones, burning of ketones, and use of ketones. This is a shift. That last 15% of energy will gradually shift towards absorbing and burning carbs, or absorbing, or generating and burning ketones, and it'll go back and forth a little bit between those. But as it shifts hard in one mode, it takes some time. So that's what I'm trying to steer. And then every so often go, hey, I'm still metabolically flexible enough to pound a pint of ice cream, or have whatever, have some carbs, have a pizza. I don't do it every day, or a few days in, I go, oh yeah, that's right. My body doesn't seem to like this. My acetone makes me go, oh yeah, I do feel like crap. Oh yeah, I probably should, not have had both a pizza and a pint of ice cream last night or something, So then it helps me with boundaries a little bit, just like, my Oura ring helps me go deep sleep, woo, or woo, I better pay a little more attention to my sleep hours right now. Not that I trust any of the data on these things. Data is just data. You got to take it with a grain of salt. Your brain map data has noise in it from muscle tension. Sleep trackers don't do REM at all, at all. Nobody believe REM from a sleep tracker. It's just magical numbers. And, but it's all data, and deep sleep is a great number on these things. So anyways. Yeah, it's probably a little more. Yeah, yeah, right, right. Well, this is what I'm saying is data's imperfect, and you have to go, data point. Is it valid? Is there noise in it? Is it meaningful? And some of the data out of sleep trackers is meaningless, like REM for the most part. Some data is very meaningful, but can be thrown off. If your ring doesn't fit perfectly, maybe it's good 5 days out of 6, but the last day you're like, whoa. If your data doesn't seem plausible, guess what? It's probably not valid. So treat, yeah, and different trackers have different, strengths and weaknesses, unfortunately. I think the Whoop and the Aura are probably the two best ones, but I also tend to coach people on only look at, in terms of sleep, only look at the total sleep and the deep sleep. Ignore everything else, because across people, the staging of light versus deep or REM, or it's just not super accurate. So because REM is a state where the body and brain, well, the brain looks active and the body looks asleep, and you can't distinguish those things from the limbs very well. Um, the body does a bunch of things across sleep stages to keep you safe, essentially, and to keep you sleeping appropriately. One of those things is um, not moving during your dreams, not getting up and acting out your dreams. So there's something called SMR, or a sensory motor tone, where your body deeply relaxes. We also use it when we're awake to like focus hard. We deeply relax and focus on things. That's what cats do when they see a bird. They still and focus. Humans do it as well. The opposite of that is called ADHD, the failure of SMR. But the sleep staging thing, during REM, the body's paralyzed. During slow wave sleep, it moves a little bit. It moves side to side a little bit. And you get body temperature changes, heart rate changes, and movement changes that are all picked up by the devices these days, as well as even now SpO2 and things are about to roll out in all the devices. But generally, movement, heart rate changes, variability, and temp. Those things look very, very similar, the same in REM and light sleep, the same, basically. You're moving in light sleep, and stage 2 sleep, when you've just stopped moving, the brain's still awake. Or as you transition, it looks the same from the point of view of the metrics you're actually picking up. So even good sleep labs need, like really, really good sleep labs need a pretty big EEG. They need respiration devices, and they need actigraphy, really sensitive movement on at least one limb, often 2 limbs. So there's just not a good enough resolution for the data points being picked up to measure. So people always, REM is I'm kind of annoyed, and I tend to mildly yell at all the people in these sleep tracker companies when I talk to them. I'm kind of annoyed because all my clients, thousands of people a year are worried about their REM, and I'm like, don't worry about it. Here's the thing. If your REM is disrupted significantly within a week or two, you rapidly develop psychosis, rapidly, like significantly, full-blown crazy, hallucinations, distorted thoughts. You're really wild and bizarre. If your REM is screwed up, you got bigger problems, and you know it. You don't have to look for your REM as an index, and REM doesn't flex the same way other aspects of sleep do. The brain protects it. It has certain need. It's a very specific thing for plasticity and organization. So it's protected, but deep sleep is not protected. Total sleep hours, not protected. And those things flex. Deep sleep flexes night to night really, really well based on what you just did. So if you can just look at one thing, the deep sleep number is the one thing that, watch it. It's reasonably valid. Husband it, shepherd it, build it up, figure out what you did the past 2 days that are screwing with it. That's the one number that I actually like people to watch, is the deep sleep number. Yeah. Mm. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I would say that I view exogenous ketones the same way I view the question about fasting. It's like, well, for what purpose? Like what are your goals? Yes, there could be exceptionally, like, why do you want to fast for 36 hours? For some people, that's exactly what you need to do, or longer. But for a lot of people, a lot of intermittent fasting are really tight windows. I'm going to do one meal a day. If you're a woman in your 20s and 30s with a performance bent and you have some fertility, want to maintain fertility, you do not want to do ultra dense intermittent fasting OMADs with low fat. You will rapidly crush your body into not functioning like a young, healthy person. By the same token, these intense states can create dramatic change for the body and the brain. And I often do, especially in these days where there's a lot of post-COVID brain, a lot of brain fog. Post-COVID brain, by the way, looks just like concussions do on brain mapping. Or like a mold exposure that's significant, or Lyme that's crazy, or major apnea. Any neuroinflammatory thing looks the same on a brain map. But I have hundreds of people where I have like the problem they came in with, gorgeous change. They come back a year later with COVID, after having COVID, and there's like big deficits in slow brain waves. It's like it also interacts with old concussions. It takes old neuroinflammatory seeds that aren't flaring up, and it makes them swell up huge. So I see this a lot. And if you're somebody that has a brain injury has seizures, that has a post-COVID brain, that's got significant slow power aging brain. I really like an intense intervention, doing hardcore, back to Vince Garanda, hardcore steak and eggs, low, carnivore, no carbs, no allowance, incidentals only. No, I get to have my 20. No carbs at all. You can eat things that have a face. That's it. For 6 weeks. Because it takes you, if you're really bad at generating ketones, it can take up to 2 weeks to really be in a deeper generative state, that suffering that, as you move through it. And then it can take you another few weeks to become good at utilizing ketones, even after you're good at generating them, maybe up to a full week before you're even starting to sometimes. So folks that have brain stuff, wear and tear, performance goals, body transformation goals, and this makes sense, doesn't for everyone, but I often suggest 6 weeks of hardcore carnivore. First 3 weeks get you adapted. The next 3 weeks are where the healing and the transformation is maximal for anti-inflammatory stuff. Also, ketones are used not just for fuel, but for building blocks. It's kind of like those Japanese kintsugi bowls, the gold thread throughout the shattered pottery that is now more beautiful after it's fixed. Well, ketones will find their way to damaged tissue. The brain and the body will take ketones and take oxidized fat cells and bits of molecules and get rid of them, replace it with a ketone, which is resistant itself to oxidation compared to fat. So now you have a gold thread through your old fractured tissue that is going to be resistant and to future inflammation. And ketones themselves are anti-inflammatory, which roundabout gets you back to exogenous ketones. Exogenous ketones can suppress the insulin fluctuation, and they can also act anti-inflammatory on their own. So I think they're useful for that if you need them in a short period, in a stopgap, essentially. You're trying to throw everything at the system. Or potentially for recovery. I mean, I think about this whole partitioning of energy thing, the energy flux stuff, I call the LITC, the leptin, insulin, mTOR cycling strategy, where you look at different aspects of the energy flux and the signaling. And mTOR, protein signaling, is kind of like insulin reacting to glucose. And you can kind of play with some of these activators with exogenous ketones if you need to, essentially. But I would not generally suggest those are necessary unless you're at extreme performance edge and you're trying to, we don't burn fats very rapidly, for instance. Maybe you're a long distance athlete who's a carnivore athlete and you're hitting, 50 miles into your century ride and you're just like, oh, damn it, that's right. I guess I'm not very good at, keeping the high output going. Instead of sucking down bananas or goo gel, you could just switch to ketones. And now, at 2 calories a gram, you're getting the energy, but you're also probably very, very well adapted to burn ketones directly, not in your brain at least. And the brain can control the muscles to some extent. So, I think there are places where it should be and can be used, but I also think that the point of ketones is to generate them, not to eat them. In terms of, you care about the things that have needed to have happened to generate them. The presence of them is a bit incidental, but all the things your body needs to do to be in a mode of making them is what I want to get done often. So. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Measured in the blood? Yeah. So this can happen. You see this in the urine quite easily. When people first get into ketones, they grab test strips and they're like, "Holy cow, I'm making ketones! This thing turned blue! Woohoo!" And after about a month and a half of that, it goes away, and you're like, "What the hell? I'm not making ketones." Well, you are, but now you're using this stuff instead of passing it through. In the blood, that doesn't happen quite the same way. In the breath, it can happen that way. But chances are that now your wife is a vegan chef, right? So I imagine she mostly eats things without faces. Um, is that true? Ah, that's your answer. That that's your answer right there. She's good at dietarily converting saturated fats and things into ketones. You were less good at it at that time. And or you had a higher amount of calories, you were in caloric excess or not in as much of a deficit for the 2 days prior than she was, or you had higher free carbs. Your liver was more full in general for a couple of days because liver stores for you, I'm guessing 400 to 500, maybe 600 grams because you're a pretty muscular guy. You probably have about 450 in your liver, another 150 in your muscles. The muscles shouldn't be counted, of course, because it's a slow storage. But um, you may have been still sipping at liver stores 3 days in, and she's a little smaller than you are. Women are faster, hotter metabolism. She burned through her ketones. Wasn't in a caloric excess the same way you were for a few days before. That could explain it all, honestly. But like I have done experiments where I have no carbs for 2 days before, and then I do a day of fasting, and that first day of fasting, I spike ketones super high. Or at 2 carbs days before, fast for 1 day, a little bit of ketones. So it's liver glycogen stores is my guess is your answer, but I don't know. Yeah, I mean, humans do really well when you shift into somewhat constrained macros. You can either do really well in terms of health and aging, keeping protein somewhat moderate, keeping sugars very low, but good fats and complex carbs very high. Or you can do the opposite. You can keep protein somewhat high, fat either high or moderate, and carbs extremely low. And either way seems to work very well for aging, for all kinds of things. And it doesn't always work for every goal or every body, but humans tend to work very well when you don't combine fat, sugar, and carb in the same high amounts. I think basically because the only things that exist in nature that have those things in high amounts are things that are growth medium for other things like nuts and milk. Beyond that, nothing contains fat, carbs, and protein in one food. It doesn't exist, basically. So that should give us a clue that maybe we shouldn't be eating donuts because they don't exist in that form. Food doesn't come that way generally. So, yep, yeah, yeah. But you would if you came across a beehive, you didn't like put up honey for the next 6 months. You were like, holy cow, yay! And you like just ate honey for like 2 days straight. So and if you had and if you had came across a prehistoric McDonald's, you would have binged and then you would have been super psyched and remembered it for the next 2 months until you could get back that place again. So the reward value of high salt, high fat, crunchy food is ridiculous. The satiety per calorie is of food that has very low caloric density in some ways high caloric density, low satiety density. When you add in free carbs and you add in fats and carbs together, you really screw with the satiety. So if you have mostly protein per gram has the most satiety. So it's really bizarre. This is what Vince Garanda, to refer to him a third time now, did in the 80s and 90s with Arnold and those guys. They didn't feel deprived in the slightest eating their diets because the protein was so high. When you get up to a certain level of protein, a gram roughly per pound of body weight, if you can eat that, 150 grams of protein, 200 grams of protein a day, you start not wanting to have other food, like additional food. The satiety goes up so high that you're like, what the hell? I'm eating 1,000 calories a day. I'm in a 1,500 calorie deficit and I do not feel hungry. I do not feel deprived. And the mTOR activation and the fatty acids feeding your ketone system are keeping metabolism high enough that you can do things like that without suppressing metabolism. So I like to drop in periodic fasting, because periodic doesn't screw with metabolism the way intermittent does or chronic does. So periodic fasting mixed with macronutrient cycling into super low carb, high protein for satiety to put me in a caloric deficit without tanking, actually increasing metabolism through high protein, and then cycle this stuff as stressors until my body is performing how I want, or you're healing how somebody wants to, you know. So yeah, he's softened. Paul's doing honey a lot these days, I think. Right? He's enjoying honey. I'm not sure how he eats it. I think he puts honey on steak. I'm not sure I want to do that, but you know. Oh gosh. Mm, mm, mm. Oh, interesting. Yeah, to some extent. Also, you know, carbs are turned into energy quickly, uh, fat moderately, and protein poorly. So, protein's not the highest value, reward value, quick food. It's also the hardest to get. It's hard to hunt down another creature and kill it and prepare it, etc. But it's really easy to pick some fruit or, you know, that kind of stuff. So, I think that you're onto something, yes, but I think that behind that is the idea that humans need to, we're designed or evolved, whatever, to have the ability to become metabolically flexible within one person, to shift the milieu as needed, to fast for long periods, to binge for long periods, to go. I think we're built to be actually extremophiles in some way with energy flux. And modern humans, because of how we're built, have gotten really good at husbanding, you know, our energy. And I think that the ready access to high amounts of energy are a big problem. And this is why things like keto and fasting and all those things work so well, is because it adds artificial, any extreme diet, anything works to lose weight and improve insulin sensitivity pretty much. And then it's about what happens as well in consequence. This is why I like the higher protein and the periodic fasting, because they have very few adaptive consequences. You aren't screwing with metabolism too much. But I think that the body, everything, variability is life. Insulin varying is what you need. High insulin, you die. Cortisol varying is what you need for alertness and energy, but cortisol goes up and stays up. Hippocampus dies, depression happens, everything falls over. Variability is life. The body temperature, every 24 hours, your body temperature oscillates by about a degree, a full degree, not because the body can't keep control of it. It's got some value to oscillate by a full degree every single 24 hours. Variability is life. So eating high amounts of carbs all day long every day because they were delivered by DoorDash to, you know, or whatever, it's not variability. And nor is going hardcore, full-blown carnivore, that's it, no carbs ever. It's not variability. So I like to find the ways that feel good, but then build enough variability in to keep the system flexible, basically. Yeah, I did that a couple years ago. Yeah. I mm, it is. It's another one of those things you can do like a 6 week, you know, Garanda style carnivore. It's an acute thing, and if you're at the time I started it, I really decided to do it. I did it for, gosh, I did it for like between 4 and 8 months. I took some breaks the second 4 months, but I did it for a while. I found it after I got into it. I mean, fasting, you know, 48 hours or 44 hours, what I was doing. I was doing 22, 44, 66 all cycles is what I do sometimes. The first 4 months I did alternate day. The second 4 months I did 24, 44, 66s. And it gets really easy after a couple of fasts, but that's a strategy I use to essentially reset insulin sensitivity, drop a lot of body fat, and do it without shutting down the metabolism. Because in the other days, you got 2, 4, or 6 hour eating windows, at least 2 meals. And in those days, one of my rules for myself became to try to hit that 0.8 or 1 gram per protein per pound of body weight. So, I was able to remain satisfied, do 44-hour fast rolling for months. I was only eating about, even when I was eating large amounts of food, I was only eating about 1,800 calories of mostly protein and, some fat, about equal amounts of calories from both. And I mean, I lost 35 pounds of fat in 4 months or something stupid. It was just like, I lost almost 50 pounds, it was just stupid. And and that was, I ended that experiment about a year ago. And in the previous year, I've been eating carbs and playing with pushing the other end of the envelope to figure out what my thoughts are in some ways around metabolism. And because people work with me a lot for various goals. When you're working with someone's brain, you're kind of working with everything that they're experiencing. So supporting their brain through habits here is useful, but I also tend to hear about all the stuff they struggle with. So I've been pushing the other envelope. And even here, a year after moving away from that strict sort of thing and only fasting, once a week for 24 hours, for 44 hours usually, and eating tons of crap, 3,000, 5,000 calories a day, playing with crushing my metabolism here and there. I'm only about 15 pounds heavier than I was a year ago. And I'm still relatively trim, all things considered, still about 20% body fat, but I was down to like verging on single digits body fat. And I am now metabolically flexible, healthy, average, non-deprived, and know how to shave off, body fat if I decide to in my 50s to become a stage guy. I will not. No, I will not subject anyone to me on stage, but doing body stuff. But it's fun to. I wish someone had figured out. Sat me down in my 20s and said, "Dude, here's how you get abs, or here's how you get muscle mass." Because, gosh, I know how now, and I wish I'd known how. And I tried so hard in my 20s. I don't want to try that hard now. Whatever. My 50s, I don't really care anymore about looking jacked and being super awesome. I just want to be healthy and strong and functional. But gosh, if I had known what I know now 30 years ago, I would look very different now. I would have a very different relationship with my body. So anyways. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. Mm, mm, mm. Yep. 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 Okay. 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 Significant. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, otherwise you suppress. Exactly. Yeah, yeah. That's great. Well, this is what the bodybuilders did with Vince in the 80s and 90s. Like we're all figuring out now that if you drop both carbs and fat out of your large amount, that is the mode of shredding. Keto is not a body fat. I mean, it is if you're metabolically poor, you get too much energy. A keto diet with low carbs and high fat will shred body fat off to a certain extent, but you'll plateau there. But a bodybuilder style diet of low carb, low fat, and high protein is what almost anybody can reset insulin. It's a great diet to people are using it to repair type 2 diabetes sometimes, as long as your kidneys are okay. And by the way, high protein diet, someone's already writing in the comments. I can see high protein diets do not screw with the kidneys. There's really no evidence of that. In fact, they probably help the kidneys. High protein diets seem to make the kidneys get bigger and stronger. So you only have problems with protein in your kidneys if you already have kidney problems, significant ones. Anyways, so I'm a big fan of this style. Yeah. 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 And it's hard to get toxic. It takes 7-8 months of high dose vitamin D every day, 50,000, 100,000 IUs to get toxic for most people. So especially in a pandemic, especially, in places where you might not live and, get enough vitamin D. I mean, it's always better to do it from the sun if you can and do it in the morning light. But, in the pandemic, folks are asking me from a supplemental strategy how they should modify their immune support. And I'm saying, oh, I think you should be taking 10,000 of D3 every morning, And yeah, every 6 months, make sure you aren't building up too much, but it would take you more than 6 months at high levels like that. And that's not that high a level. When I was growing up early, it was like, oh, 2,000 is a lot. Now they're like 50,000 is a lot. The level just keeps going up, and every tissue in the body's got a vitamin D receptor. So, but vitamin D and zinc in the pandemic, zinc increases the ciliary beat rate of cells. So if you have good zinc levels versus no zinc levels, like most Westerners, the cilia in your lungs will actually beat twice as fast and clear viruses out of your lungs much, much faster if you have zinc in your system. So literally respiratory viruses, zinc protects against them, not through immune, which it does some things with immune, but through keeping your lungs, clearing all the stuff out of the lungs through mechanical mechanisms by little beat cilia in the lung tissue. So zinc and D in this current age we're in. Right. Right. Exactly. Yeah. So magnesium, zinc, D, these are things that I think we need to evaluate our relationship with. I think most people in this country, at least, are deficient in magnesium pretty aggressively, which is a huge deal for all kinds of stuff that we think of as cognitive or mental or physical, just as electrolytes, essentially. And you can use a good electrolyte balance, by the way. If you're going into one of these hard, low carb things, you're going to waste tons of water because every gram of glycogen that you burn is going to need 3 grams of water with it, essentially. So you're going to waste a ton of water and dump a ton of potentially sodium and magnesium and calcium. So you want to make sure to have electrolytes coming in really nicely if you're adapting the first time to a really significant either fasting period or to a very low carb period. And that, by the way, will avoid the keto flu. The keto flu is an electrolyte imbalance people push through. You don't have to tolerate it. It's completely not necessary. And electrolytes make those fasting windows just so much easier as well, because a lot of what we perceive as hunger is actually the desire for liquid or thirst or salt. So if you keeping your electrolytes up and hydrating well, suddenly you don't have the keto flu. You can fast better. So I'm a big fan of the electrolyte management sort of piece of biohacking too, especially as you constrain. Yeah. 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 Yes. I know. And that hasn't caught up. That's the thing. That hasn't caught up to conventional medicine. I'm in my early 50s. I went to see a cardiologist, some checkout, and we did the whole thing, the CAC and all the cardiac stuff, whatever else. But he tells me, he's like, oh my gosh, what do you eat? Oh my gosh, we're going to have to put you on a statin. This is really problematic. We're going to really need to address some things for you. And then he gets my CAC, just the diet on paper alone. Like, he was really concerned. 2 different cardiologists were actually like really like yelling at me for like a week about this. And then a couple weeks later, they get back the CAC, 0. They get back the max pulse, perfect. They get back the really expanded lipid panel. They're like, wait a minute. This is the best numbers we've ever seen in years. What's going on? Now, part of what's going on is I have familial low cholesterol, genetically low cholesterol. So it's really hard for me to make a lot of cholesterol. I tend to top out in the low 100s as my max. So they saw my cholesterol at 113. They were like, oh. But I also had exceptionally good VDL, HDL, triglycerides. And all I'm doing, I'm telling them, I fast 3 times. This is a year, it's 6 months, 9 months ago. I'm like, I fast 3 times a week for about 36 to 48 hours. And on the days I'm eating, I have about 3 meals of, you know, usually steak and eggs, mostly, you know, so I'm eating, probably about 1.5 pounds of steak and maybe between 4 to 6 eggs a day. And, yeah, some days I do break down. Weekends I often have pizza and ice cream and crap. It's why I'm a little bit, heavier than I want to be. And they're like, oh my God, this guy's going to die. And they're used to seeing folks in cardiology centers and doctors' offices who are like only going to die from the stuff they've been doing. So they're like really, really starting to ramp up all the advice. I'm getting emails, and then they get my blood work and they're like, oh. And after the cognitive dissonance subsided, they said, oh, this must be because you have amazing genetics. They almost did, right? But they said eventually, oh, this must just because you have amazing genetics. It must be because you can get away with this because of your familial cholesterol being so low. It must be because of how you're built. Wow, you got really lucky. Right. So I found a new cardiologist, but this is like a very well, significant major cardiologist in Beverly Hills who's like everyone goes to and has all the cachet and, it has privileges at all the big hospitals, but was starting to tell me that red meat's going to kill me before even thought to examine how my metabolism worked or if I had any oxidation or if I had any issues with fats in my system. And I don't, apparently, which is great. But the experience is really annoying having to plug into that, conventional medicine system and have them tell me. And this is what I get annoyed with too. I have a PhD in cognitive neuroscience. I teach, aging medicine, and I have a whole, pretty good. And so many doctors just don't care that I happen to know all the stuff that's going on. And, they're like, they get annoyed when I'm like, oh, so should we look at this? So when that happens, my advice to biohackers is find your own find a new doctor, Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure it is. Yep. 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 Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Mm. Right. Oh, you do? Okay. Yeah. 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 Mm-hmm. Sure. Again, 80s bodybuilder diet, a big jug of milk in the gym. We saw stuff. We saw that happen. Yeah. It's growth formula for baby cows. It works for baby Joes too. It's a good stuff for that. Not everyone can handle lactose. Is one of those things that genetically really variable across people. So lactose aside, if you can tolerate lactose, milk's okay if you want to have lots of energy coming in. Ah, yes. It's also one of the most addictive. It's one of the most addictive foods on the planet too. It has reward features in it and subtle flavor features in it that are like oddly reinforcing, like dopaminergics and things. Yeah. So that is if people ask me, I want to I can't get rid of dairy. What I say to them is, okay, stick to hard dairy, cultured hard dairy. Don't do soft cheeses and don't drink your dairy. But and that's what I do. I put a little bit of like really nice New England, like 4 or 5, 10-year cheddar in my eggs and things. That's how I do it. But cultured cheeses will drop out a lot of the lactose, a lot of the secondary things, and I do believe the rich micronutrient environments are good, and I think cultured cheeses are good for that. But I think a lot of people can't handle lactose. I also think that if your metabolism has been screwed up, you might not want to risk dairy for a while because it is such a a strong source of growth promoters that if you're trying to make your insulin and your mTOR and your leptin and your ghrelin a little more sensitive to the energy flux, that's going to be a loud signal, and you may want to just drop it out for a while to create more discrete signals of, in some ways, simpler foods. Dairy is a very complex food in some ways compared to like muscle meat or whatever else. So that's my take on it. It's nuanced. I think it can be very useful to gain weight. And beyond that, I also think a lot of humans don't handle milks very well or lactose very well. So that's another consideration, but right. To cut out. Yeah, I mean, I would say certainly a little bit of cheese in your meals here and there. Don't run away from if you like it, but I would say do run away from milk in your coffee because you're having it all the time. It even a small amount of it 3 times a day really builds up. Also, we tend to have coffee before we eat. So if you're having calories in your coffee, you've just destroyed your fasting window. So I think adulterants to coffee in the first half of the day have multiple consequences. One is you just stopped your fasting window. And two, you know, it could be people they don't tend to just put good things in their coffee. It tends to be like, let me put some sugar in my coffee, my sugar. So yes, coffee, a lot of stuff is better. I think it's okay to put stuff in your coffee if you must, but I actually resisted for a long time dropping milk out of my coffee. I wasn't doing carbs. I wasn't doing this, but I'm like, I got to put cream in my coffee, man. Come on. It's coffee. Ugh. But I forced myself for about 2 weeks to not do it. And what I found is that you will bitter adapt within about 7 to 10 days. And coffee stops becoming this narrow, metallic, bitter flavor. And suddenly the same coffee blooms out in this rich, complex set of flavors. And my advice is drop the milk out of your coffee and then go up in quality in your coffee. Become a snob. Get extremely high quality, varied coffees and start exploring the flavor profiles and use the bitterness as a mindfulness thing and play around with. And now, I mean, for a couple of years, several years now, the idea of putting milk in my coffee, I'm like, oh, cloudy, thick flavors. I want coffee. So my perspective on it flipped because I forced my body to adapt, and now my preferences followed along. So flavors like that. Flavor will adjust. If you live in a new country for a couple of months, you're like, oh, these flavors, where's I? But after you leave that country, you're like, oh, where's that flavor? I want that flavor that I found so alien 6 months ago. So this is about that adaptive thing. Humans are used to adapting to the energy, the flavors, the stressors around them, and then adapting again, and then adapting again. So I think you can contextualize this the same way, perhaps. Oh, really? Yeah. Those fake meat burgers and things, they're pretty bad for the body, as far as I understand. There's lots of studies coming out now showing that they're not very good. They're also exceptionally bad for the planet. That's the thing. I mean, the commercial factory farming is quite bad for the planet, and this is why it's important to make sure your meat is sourced and grown how you want, and do locavore and all that kind of stuff. And I think it's very, very important. And there's questions of access and questions of class and questions of fairness and all kinds of things that start to get brought up. But the artificial meats don't solve any of that. They actually just move the problem into a marketing package that says they're solving that, and none of it. The health stuff isn't solved. The environment stuff isn't solved. It's just as bad, maybe worse than conventional factory farming, because it has this patina. It's like having fake organic fruit would be worse than having non-organic fruit, because people would spend more for it and want it, and it wouldn't be any better. That's what's happening here. So I'm not I guess my visceral mind is balking a little bit, but my science fiction futurist mind is like, ooh, in terms of lab grown meat, I think we're getting to the place where we're about to see across the board. The next big revolution is going to be fake meat that is made from meat. We already have fake ice cream. There's a company called, was it Brave Robot, I think, makes fake dairy, lab grown dairy. It's vegan dairy, no cows involved. And they make ice cream out of it, out of lab grown dairy. So it's dairy, but not from animals. And, this is a big Gatesian thing. Yeah, right. So see what your wife thinks of that. But there's also this sort of Gatesian, push now to do lab grown meat and vat grown stuff. So I think in 10, 15 years, yeah, I think in 10 years, 15 years, the Beyond Burgers and Impossibles will be, I mean, their companies are, it was all marketing and fluff, and they're basically failing as companies these days. No one's selling their meat anymore, and all the fast food joints have stopped carrying them, and they're on their way out. But I bet the next thing is going to be meat grown in a lab, a humane meat or something they're going to call it. I don't know what, but it'll be like, sort of a mix of Soylent Green and artificial meat. And that'll be, that's the sci-fi world we're heading to. And so we'll move into people that really want their grown locavore stuff. They know the farmer, and the other 85% of the world will have mass produced meat that eliminates the amount of diesel and transport and individual animals suffering and antibiotics and all that stuff just goes by the wayside. So a lot of the factory farming, I think, can be eliminated in this new promise of artificial, lab grown meat. It's a little squicky, it's a little like, ugh, the idea of eating, I'm not sure how I feel about it, but I'm sure that 10 years from now, 20 years from now, we'll be like, oh yeah, of course you're eating a hot dog that was grown in a lab. Why would you not? They're hot dogs, they're better than current hot dogs probably, so. Can be. Oh, yeah. 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 And some of it is marketplace, and some of it is because they can charge $4 more. Yeah. 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 So again, I think we're in an exciting, time, and we'll look back and laugh in 10, 20 years about all the myths that finally got dispelled that were started in the 70s around this idea of low fat and fat being the problem and sugar being fine as long as you don't do too. Yeah. All that is, of course, now firmly eroded, but structure of scientific revolutions, old scientists don't change their mind. They just die and young scientists take over. So that's sort of the process of how stuff happens. We've gone now 50 years of this low fat hypothesis being disproven, and we're starting to get to the place where information will out. 2 days ago there was a study showing that a lot of the initial Alzheimer's research around amyloid plaques may have been falsified. So it turns out that Alzheimer's, this metabolic theory of Alzheimer's that people have been getting batted away for years in terms of funding, maybe the actual core of it. This is the Brazetin, recode program, the metabolic, type 3 diabetes stuff. That seems to be where it's at. And we're discovering now that amyloid, which is an immune molecule, may not be that big of a deal. We kind of knew this 30 years ago when clearing amyloid didn't do anything to symptoms in animal models, but we're just, information will out, and the modern world, interconnectedness, and computers assembling big databases of medical stuff, and the singularity that Kurzweil's, hoping for, while it may not show up in that fashion, is going to mean that medical advancements, health information is going to live in silos less, and you're going to be able to operate with more of a picture. I mean, I can measure my breath ketones. I couldn't do that in the 70s. You can go to the gym, one of Peak Brain's gyms, in your home or in our local cities, and exercise your brain activity. You couldn't exercise your body in the 40s at a gym on the corner. You just went out and worked in the farm or lifted some packages. But like in the 60s and 70s and 80s, suddenly a gym in every corner. So we have this perspective, and I'm measuring my ketones in my breath. This is not because I have diabetes or some major problem, but because I'm interested in controlling the variables. So we're on like a 50-year slide of information moving out of the realm of the experts into the realm of the individual, demystifying it. And a lot of what I do, brain or body, is really around providing that agency more than providing any individual intervention. So there's my soapbox. Thanks. Yep. Well, it accelerates. Yeah, Kurzweil's exponent, technology accelerates. That's why I'm saying that, 10 years from now, I really do think we're going to be pulling up and getting a grown steak that was grown by GlaxoSmithKline or, whatever company, whatever, Microsoft steaks, and grown by your computer, 3D printed steaks in 20 years. What do I have today? I'm going to ribeye, and you plug it into your computer and it 3D prints out of your protein paste and your amino acid solution. And, so. Right. Well, you probably won't have to, because the idea is that this will solve enough supply and access stuff that it should leave enough. If you solve the food problem for half the world all at once, essentially, or through, we still have a big issue with energy, but some of these new lab things are taking carbon and turning it into meat. So there may be in a few years carbon capture that actually produces burgers. So, I mean, there's already power plants in like Iceland, your wife's country, homeland. They have carbon negative power plants there, and they're capturing CO2 and storing it in the basalt underneath the power plant for the elves, But it's a little, no, they protected little elf reserves there. Yeah, that's what I hear. So, anyways, getting a little far afield. Oh man, always nice to see you again. Definitely. Thanks. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and we'll give all the Coach Joe crew a discount on the club memberships in the offices. They can get brain maps ongoing pretty cheaply that way. So yeah, yeah, we have New York City, LA, Orange County, St. Louis in the US, a few in Europe. But I would say about 80, 75% of our clients never see our offices, and we just do stuff with equipment and live coaches. So if you want to jump into the repetitive brain mapping, low cost access, you'll need a physical office near you. But otherwise, we can work with you regardless if you have brain transformation needs, essentially. Mm, mm. Yeah. Well, certainly, the brain adapts to stressors and cramps up against threat and biases resources towards scanning for how the world has been recently so you can prepare for it. And on a brain map, QEEG, you can see the back midline posterior cingulate. A lot of people, when the brain's been traumatized, it cramps up and is always evaluating. And the experience of that is rumination or PTSD. But it's not a disease. It's a cramped up resource that naturally exists and wants to do something like watch the road, heads up. But when it's cramped up on high gear, is always activated. Or the anterior cingulate cramps up into obsession, or the right temporal junction cramps up into social anxiety because the world is too loud, essentially, too much information coming in. But these are things that are, so traits that build up as your brain adapts, or traits you're built with. And one of my big takeaways, messages for people is, this stuff is relatively stable. It's also exceptionally changeable. Your brain is more changeable than your body. I can get you executive function or control over anxiety way faster than I can get you abs, usually. Way faster. The brain changes in a few months. The body takes, several months to a year to really make massive transformations. The brain's often 3 to 6 months. I mean, even six months is a lot of neurofeedback. It's a major change. In 3 months, most people make a couple of standard deviations on a bell curve of improvement on executive function. And the anxiety markers in the brain go away the same way, and speed of processing changes the same way. So it's just a tool set to give you control, but you will see the sort of trait tendency to ruminate, the trait tendency to have a speed of processing issue because your stress is so high, your sleep is crappy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And these things do impact people. And like when you do that attention test, that stupidly boring thing, I can see now your attention's pretty good compared to where it was 4 years ago. So, and you do have both fog and stress markers from 4 years ago that are reduced now. So the perspective is the things you've done in your life and your lifestyle, your healthy habits, and you've built your brain up in a certain direction, and you're validating in performance and in some modeling of physiology, things that may, match with how you feel. That's the real stuff. When you find the stuff that, oh yeah, I do feel that way. Well, then this is probably representing that. So it gives you that round trip of like going, wait a minute, what's my physiology doing? And to demystify some of what's happening under your skull. So thanks. Sure. So Peak Brain Institute is the website.com. And we have Peak Brain LA is all of our socials. And if folks want to follow me, I'm Andrew Hill, PhD, and all the socials. But that's mostly just like steaks and occasionally baking goods you see on there. So if you want to see cooking, check me out. But otherwise, Peak Brain LA for socials or peakbraininstitute.com. Great. Oh, thanks, Coach. Nice seeing you again. All right. Take care. Talk to you soon.